Would you like to speak to your...
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I would. The bottom line for all of us, and we all know that there is a bottom line, and you have referred to it, Chair, in your account, is there simply isn't enough money coming into public services, whether it's the NHS or whether it's the county council. And we, as an opposition party, could simply take the line, there isn't enough money, and it's the government's fault, and that's where we're going to lay the blame. But we don't feel that that is a suitable approach for any opposition party to take, because after all, we are elected to do our best for the children and the people of Cambridgeshire. So the Labour group, small as it is, metaphorically rolled up its sleeves and looked at areas of the budget. We looked at where there are pressures internally on our services. We looked at what residents have been telling us about the services and where they want to see more services. And therefore we have come up with some ideas about how we might spend money. And we do support the increase in council tax because unfortunately it does seem to be the only way forward. We could draw on reserves, but that's a short-term fix for what are longer-term problems. And the Labour group certainly have proposed an increase in council tax in every alternative budget since 2013. So us proposing the 2.99% increase now is certainly in line with our policy in the past. So what kinds of things would we like to see money spent on? And we've listed them in our alternative budget here, and I'll just go through them briefly. First of all, libraries. We're glad to see the book fund has been restored to its 325k, but that has been at the expense of some reduction of funding elsewhere in the library budget. And we do feel that over the time of austerity, libraries have taken rather a big hit. There have been, there's been a lowering of investment in there, and therefore we would like to see further money in the investment of our libraries. They are a vital part of the community. And they don't just lend books anymore. I mean, libraries are far more than that. And therefore we are proposing an increase in the funding, the investment in libraries of 325k. Again, looking at highways, we have got government funding for a pothole fund, but the thing about highways that I think is most valued by people are the local highways initiatives. The opportunity for local people to draw attention to the things in their area that they believe if we do something about will greatly enhance the environment. We get applications every year. There isn't always enough money to cover the applicants, and so we'd like to propose further investment in that area so that local people have a bigger pot in which to make applications for things that will enhance their environment. The other issue which comes up from many people is street lighting. And particularly residential streets, which do seem in some areas to be remarkably dark in places. I did some work with finance people, particularly Rob Emery, and I'm very grateful for his help, to discover that the kinds of lamps that were put in residential areas are at the moment at their maximum illumination, and they cannot be any brighter. I must say I was exceedingly surprised about this because they're considerably less bright than those on the main traffic streets. And it does seem rather a short-sighted policy to spend all that money on putting in lamps that can't actually be particularly bright. But what we could do, we could replace some of the 10% of lamps that were taken out when the new lighting system was put in, and we have proposed an amount to go into a fund there which would allow individuals to apply, much as they do for a local highways initiative, to have lamps replaced on their streets where lamps have been taken away. And so it would be up to residents to make a case to do that. The other scheme that we are very keen should continue is the Bikeability Programme. This is a programme that educates young people in safe cycling, and I think we'd all agree that safe cycling is crucial, and it's good to get to educate children in that so they might turn into safe cycling adults, of which regrettably there seems to be something of a dearth in areas of Cambridgeshire. It is funded by grant, but we understand there may be a shortfall in grant this year, and so we are proposing a modest investment to make sure that there is no shortfall in that and that the programme continues. But then we come finally some of the really big issues in our budget. And the first and foremost of those, of course, is looked after children, as we've heard this morning. There is a grant from the Transformation Fund for in-depth research into some of the key issues in that. But in the meantime, it is clear, I think, to everybody that those pressures will continue. And therefore, we have proposed an additional 1.5 million to go into the budget for looked after children for next year. And that, at the moment, is a total investment of 2.535 million, when there will be in the fund, once we've covered our shortfall, somewhat over £3 million. So we did also consider other areas. And one area, of course, that has raised a great deal of concern is children's centres and the new programme there. The Labour Group have debated this long and hard, and we have at the moment suggested that the 1.117 million that we haven't allocated should go into a strategic reserve fund. The main focus, there will be two main focuses, one of which will be looking after children's centres. I think from further consideration, we feel that staffing is vital in children's centres, and that staffing needs to be protected. We are unconvinced by the argument that savings will be backroom staff rather than frontline staff, because in many cases they are indistinguishable. So we would like to make a slight alteration to what we've got here, and we would like to actually put 750k of our 1.17 million into children's centres specifically, so that there needs to be no redundancies and that the level of staffing is maintained in children's centres and particularly in rural areas, the alternative scheme that has been put in place there. And that would then leave a small amount of money for respite care beds. We did give great consideration to the huge issue of people leaving hospital and the problems of people being ready to leave hospital, but there is nowhere for them to go. So I did speak to the Director for Adult Services about putting or suggesting additional money into purchasing respite beds. Apparently, there are no more respite beds to be purchased. So there is a huge problem here. And one of the things we would really like to stress is that it has been mooted a number of times, Chair, that we should build our own care homes specifically for respite care. And I really feel that we should look at that seriously. The problem of getting people out of hospitals is not going to go away, and we do need to do something much more dramatic about that, I think, and that would be building our own social care centres. We also looked at, and therefore we would believe that all of the money that we would put aside, which would now be 250k, would be over the year, if it does become possible to invest in respite care beds. That is what we do. The other area we consider was health visiting, and we are glad to see that the cut in health visiting to newborn children and primarily mothers will continue. There was a proposed cut, but it will continue. But we would like to ensure that it does continue in the future, because those visits are absolutely vital for newborn children and children going in the first 2 years of life and their parents, so we have put something in the baseline for the following year. The final thing we considered investing in was bus subsidies, and we're very pleased to see that there are no further cuts in bus subsidies. But when we looked at that area, we found the problem in rural areas isn't about bus subsidies, it's about buses that full stop. That there aren't any buses for you to subsidise in many rural areas, and therefore again we feel that in looking at the transport review which is going on with the Combined Authority, it is absolutely vital that transport in rural areas is considered, and that the work of the Total Transport Group, which has started to look at this area, is continued with a view to finding perhaps smarter ways of providing public transport in rural areas. But you can't subsidise buses that aren't there, and what we need in rural areas is buses. So those, in relatively brief, Chair, are some of the issues that the CCC address with the money that has been raised by this very, very welcome increase in council tax. Thank you, Chair.